Efficiency matters a lot when it comes to learning. I'm sure you're a very busy person. You only have so many hours in a day, and you can only dedicate so many of those hours to learning. Whether you're a student or otherwise, we just have other commitments that take up our time. So today I want to share with you 4 habits that have helped me to be an efficient learner, to get a lot of value out of my time. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Notion for sponsoring this video. I've used Notion for a very long time. As you'll hear throughout this video, they're a major part of my productivity toolkit. The number one mistake that I see people make, especially today with ubiquitous smartphones, notifications everywhere, is underestimating the switching cost that distractions bring. If you are in the middle of a deep thought, and then suddenly you are pulled out of that thought by a buzz in your pocket or by a ding on your computer, it will take you minutes to get back to where you were. It's a huge waste of time. The most effective learners that I know are very good at creating distraction-free environments. They very carefully limit the stimuli that they allow to affect them. I always found it very interesting in school, where I felt like I would spend a lot less time than my friends studying, but I would tend to be pretty far ahead. And I realized that a lot of these people would go to the library for 3 or 4 hours, but they'd be on their phone and they'd be talking to one another and so on. They wouldn't actually be working. What this means is that I could do as much in 30 minutes as they might be able to do in 3 hours. Because I don't have the switching costs, I'm not being constantly pulled out of thoughts. I'm able to sit down, concentrate, and actually learn. Seriously, if you just do this one thing, you'll be ahead of 90% of people. And so the first habit that I think is critical to develop is to create the habit of making your environment distraction-free whenever you sit down to learn. A major mistake that people make when they're learning is they just write down kind of word for word what the professor's saying or what their textbook or their book that they're reading is saying, or they write down nothing at all. This makes you a passive learner. In other words, you're just kind of hoping that you absorb through osmosis what's going on around you, and that maybe some of that will be retained and you'll be able to use it in the future. But passive learning is not very efficient. And so if you're trying to be an efficient learner, what I recommend is that you build the habit of being an active learner. What this looks like in practice is rather than writing down word for word what the professor is saying or what the textbook says, that you take the time to understand the concept and then to write it in your own words. This forces you to build an understanding of the topic in real time, and it brings out immediately any misunderstandings that you might have so that you can correct those misunderstandings and they don't compound over time. Now with note-taking, I think that it's really important that you build a system. And this is one of the things that I love Notion for. Now when it comes to note-taking, and this is sponsored, I use Notion all through college. I use it still to this day. And what's really nice is that over time, as I collect these pages of notes, they're searchable and I have a database of my notes. One of the cool things that Notion has introduced recently is Notion AI, and I love how this integrates into databases. One of the crazy things that you can do with Notion AI and databases is you can create a column that parses the information from the page in the database row and then generates some value for you. So for example, if you want to have a 1-sentence summary of all of your pages, which is something that I find incredibly important as you're building a database over time, it does it for you, almost like magic. So if you're thinking about note-taking software, there's nothing better out there, and Notion AI makes it really powerful. There's kind of this mythological idea of the dedicated student who stays in the library until 3 a.m. and wakes up at 6 a.m. to study more. But this is completely foolish. There have been periods in my life where I have been that guy, working late at night, bashing my head against the wall for some problem. And then I wake up the next morning and I realize that that problem is actually pretty trivial. And I fix a bunch of mistakes that I made the previous night. And it takes me 30 minutes to do what I had just spent 6 hours the previous night trying to do. I'm sure many of you have experienced something like this. And the reason is that hard problems require your brain to be sharp. If your brain is not sharp, let's say you're at 80% capacity, it might take you hours to do something that you could do normally if you're at 100 capacity in 30 minutes. So would you rather spend 6 grueling hours trying to figure out a problem, or 30 minutes and feel a lot better? I think most people would choose the 30 minutes, and the way to get there is to make sure that you are at your optimal mental capacity. So to ensure maximum clarity, maximum sharpness, you want to make sure that you're eating healthy, you're taking care of your body, and you're sleeping. Your health has a massive influence on how efficient you are. And it's not a one-to-one trade-off. If I sleep for 9 hours and study for 2 hours, I'm getting more out of that than if I were to sleep for 6 hours and study for another 6. Even though the overall time spent is less. The simple reason is sharpness. If you're working on a problem that requires you to be at 95% mental capacity, it's really pushing you, but you're at a 75, how are you gonna get that done? not efficiently. You might get there eventually, but it won't be very efficient. And so again, this is a massive mistake that I see a lot of students making. They don't prioritize their health, they don't prioritize their sleep, and so they end up having to take a much less efficient route through their studies. Take care of your health, sleep a lot, drink a lot of water. If you do these simple things consistently, they will pay dividends. So this is similar to note-taking, but more in the review phase. So you're not actively taking in information anymore, you're trying to make sure that you are up to date. Think about studying before a test. How a lot of people do it, and what I think is bad and inefficient, is they kind of passively read over their notes, maybe they read over some of the source material again, and then they say, yeah, I think I got it, right? But first of all, this is a bit of a waste of time. You're spending a lot of time reading over things that you've already understood. And second of all, it's just plain inefficient when it comes to learning. I prefer an active technique. So asking questions of yourself to ensure that you have understanding. And in particular, asking questions around your weak points. There's a technique that I've talked about in depth on my channel before called the Feynman technique. And it's when you're trying to assess whether or not you've understood a topic. Ask yourself to explain it as if you were explaining it to a young child. And if you're unable to do so, ask why. What is it that I'm lacking in my understanding here? This is especially useful as a technique for students who are going to be tested in a question and answer format anyways. If you only have a few hours to study for a test, it's going to be generally far more efficient to spend those hours answering a comprehensive set of questions about the material than reviewing your notes haphazardly. You're being much more intentional with your time. And I want to say that this is something that I wasn't able to do in college because these tools weren't out yet. But this is probably the coolest use of Notion AI that I've personally seen. And it's that at the end of a document, you can have it write questions for you based on your notes. Doing this is insanely powerful. It's crazy. Because it generates questions for you and then you just have to answer them. It's like having unlimited practice tests on your material. It aids with comprehension a ton and it makes you a very efficient learner. And if I was still a student, I would be taking advantage of this a ton. But even still, when I'm writing up notes about things that I'm learning, I find it incredibly valuable to have Notion AI write me questions to test my understanding. So I hope you enjoyed this video and you got something out of it. These are 4 habits that have made me an efficient learner, and I hope that they will help you do the same. Take care of yourself.